Hello and welcome to Nerdarchy, for nerds by nerds. I'm Nerdarchist Ted, and today I'm joined by
Nate the Nerdarch.
And we have, as always, a special guest on. So please introduce yourself.
Hi, my name's Douglas Cole. I run the company Gaming Ballistic. Been running a couple Kickstarters, running one now, but I develop role-playing games thus far in kind of two systems. One is sort of 5th edition SRD, and been writing for Steve Jackson Games freelance for a long time, and was recently granted a license to do something for the Dungeon Fantasy role-playing game box set.
So that is really cool. The Kickstarter, as always, the link is in the description below if you want to go check it out. It's already funded and ready to go, if I'm correct.
That is correct. We're something like 320%. We hit 100% in the first 12 hours of the campaign.
That's great.
It was a good day.
Always awesome to hear. When a Kickstarter goes out there and it's like, bam, done. That gives the creator so much, stress-free enjoyment of their campaign to be like, all right, let's just see where this goes. So,
yeah, the thing that's impressive to me is my last Kickstarter was for a game called Dragon Heresy, which is Vikings and 5th edition and some alternate rules and whatever. And I figured that would be a good one because people like Vikings. You got the Last Kingdom, you got the Vikings TV show, and it's always fun. I figured it would do pretty well, and it did better than I was expecting. But in terms of number of backers, this latest one is about to pass the full role-playing game rather than a supplement. And we're tracking, knock on wood, but we're tracking to beat it in money too. And it's a smaller, less expensive product. So if I take off my developer hat and put on my marketing and sales hat, I'm pleased, obviously. So
it's always good when you can beat your old numbers.
It's a good trend. Up is good.
So they want to know what the A stands for on your shield.
The Viking martial arts school that I go to is called Asphalt. So the A is Odin's sign, Odin's rune, and it stands for it's the Ansus rune for the ancestral people of Odin. So the A stands for Asphalt.
Well, they have a question for me, so I'm actually going to reach back here. This was a thing from oh crud, who was it?
I'm going to say it's Think Geek Products.
Think Geek, and it's not actually a die; it's a cookie jar. So no, I've never rolled this during a game or anything. And sadly, they're not in production anymore. So there's I think a D20 like coffee pot or something along those lines, but it's not the cool cookie jar.
It actually has a handle.
I think a D20 coffee pot is like the Reese's peanut butter cups of role-playing game design development, right? It's you got the die and the caffeine in one package. I think if you pureed it with pizza, you'd have everything you need for a good day.
Pizza biscotti that you can dunk in your coffee. There you go. So you do a variety of things, and I've heard you make shields.
I do. The shield behind me I made myself. It's poplar, edged in goat hide. Handle is hand-carved oak. I try and make them to. I've been studying as I mentioned, studying the Viking martial arts, and I get to talk with people who have toured Europe, handling the artifacts, and train with them. And so I've learned a lot from that about how these historical finds were made. I got into it because of game design. I knew that shields just getting a +2 armor class was kind of lame. I knew that they were more than that, right? And they were really important, right? Anyone who could grabbed a shield for like 1,000 years or more, actually, since it goes way back to the Greeks, and that was thousands BC. So I knew that it was more than what typically you get +1 or +2 to armor class in the the OSR 5th edition or whatever. I guess you can get up to +4 in Pathfinder. But I knew that there was more than that. And so before I started writing rules about it, I wanted some experience. And so I was looking for a HEMA school that taught Shield somehow. And as it happened, one of the 3 or 4 actively teaching Viking-style martial arts schools in the country, and I'm upping my. There's Hurstwick in Boston. There's Asphalt here. There are probably a couple others I'm not aware of. There are a lot of reenactment groups, but reenactment is I don't want to sound like I'm denigrating because I'm not, but reenactment is awesome and cool, and you have to be a great athlete, but a lot of there are rules there that involve the safety of the participants. And so the shields are very thick, and you have to have a certain robustness of hide, and you're not allowed to strike at the arms or the legs and stuff. And so a lot of the things that you dig up dead Vikings in Europe and you find that their arms and legs are just cut to ribbons. Well, you don't want people hurt, and so you have rules preventing that. But that's probably not how the battles were actually fought when you're trying to kill each other. And so anyway, point is that the shields are supposed to be more like what you would maybe have found. But part of the problem is, of course, is that we know very little about the Viking Age, relatively speaking. You've got some sagas, you've got some old tales, and so it seems like every day we're finding new artifacts that challenge what you know. So it's yeah.
We got a couple questions relating to Nordic and Viking stuff. Mark says, I'm playing a Nordic bard in a half Norse 5e campaign. What would unarmed combat look like in a Viking martial arts style? Wants to know how to flavor it.
So I will give myself a shameless plug. There's a Viking 5th edition martial arts-ish style, a barbarian lens called the Path of Lausatok. And Lausatok is a form of Icelandic wrestling that I borrowed the name from. But I think that there'd be a lot of grappling. There would be a lot of joint locks are universal. And in a 5th edition game, the way that I would represent a lot of that, because frankly, grappling as written is a little lame in 5th edition.
Well, either happens or it doesn't, pretty much.
It does, and there's no way to ratchet it up unless you have the 1 feat that lets you get to restrained. The control point mechanic from my book Dungeon Grappling allows you to do that. But I think that there would be a lot of takedowns and throws followed by weapon strikes. That's attested in the sagas, and all kinds of stuff like that. But you really, I think, have to get good flavor for a grappler in a lot of games. Frankly, you have to bring the house rules.
Well, that sounds like some pretty solid advice. Brian wants to know, what kind of shield techniques could a D&D monk use? I'm imagining a shield style, but with bare hands.
So in that particular case, what I would probably wind up doing is grabbing a small shield, if such a thing exists, and boy, that's a good question. I'm trying to go back to basic D&D.
Well, if you go into the earlier systems, we had the punch buckler.
Yeah. And buckler would do it.
And that would be like in the earlier editions, that was a +1 to your armor class because it was smaller. And that's what I'm personally familiar with. Doug and I were talking about MS-133 a little bit before we started. And that's, a smaller sword and a punch buckler fighting style, which, it's been a while, but I'm familiar with it.
Yeah, so this is a shield that I made for my daughter. And so what I would probably wind up doing is having the shield out front. You're moving it around, you're striking with it this way. The boss is really to cover your hand. The edge is much more robust. And you've got this nice handle here, and you can jab with it pretty intensely. So that's what I would do. I would probably look at some of the monster abilities. Like, I think one of the NPCs has a parry ability.
Yes.
That allows you to use your reaction to add armor class to your
You add AC by using your reaction.
And that's kind of one of the places where I would go with it. And maybe what you wind up doing is the cool thing is if you did use your reaction, you get advantage on a takedown attempt the next time. So that would be like, I use my reaction to do this thing, and if it would have hit me, but didn't, the next round I can basically do a judo throw or a takedown, or you get advantage on a takedown attempt, representing a setup. You know, it's like you said, you're going to have to be flexible to get past the predisposition to beat the bejesus out of someone with a sword.
So Truemate asks, with a Viking shield, do you go sword or do you go axe?
Yes.
So I'll step in here, and to agree with their yes, it depends upon what you're fighting. If you're fighting someone with a shield, you want the axe so that you can kind of grip their shield and pull them off target. Your sword is going to be a little bit more agile and moving, but with your axe, you can totally get in there. You can hook the leg, you can hook the shield, and pulling somebody off base, or off their footing, it's drastically going to change the scope of the fight.
Right, and so just to bring this around a little bit and be encompassing, in the D&D games and in Dragon Heresy, I wrote it to enable more interesting things to be done with shields. In the Dungeon Fantasy role-playing game, the powered by GURPS product, because there's active defenses with block, parry, and dodge, there are already a bit more high-resolution things that you can do with shields, and yet what I've added to the quick start fantastic dungeon grappling rules, which are like taking... I originally wrote technical grappling because I'm like, grappling should work just like weapons. And then I wrote, and that was complicated and long, and it suffered from the fact that it was my first full book, and it could have been better organized. I think the content was good, but it could have been better organized. Then I wrote a short article with Peter Del Orto for Tim Short's Manor Zine, 1,500 words of how to do control points in OSR games. Really short, really kind of cool. And enabled some good emergent behavior. Then I expanded that for 5th edition and Swords and Wizardry in a book, my first self-published book called Dungeon Grappling, which the people who have used it like it quite a bit. Anyway, so now I have, because I wrote that one better, I can take the next step and I condensed it into like two pages for Lost Hall of Tyr, my second Kickstarter and book, and all the core is there. And then I took that short version and I'm making it for GURPS, and that's a little longer because you can do more. There are more special cases. But one of the things that I added, and I swear this is getting to a point, are shield and sword binds, which is a huge deal in HEMA style combat. You use the edge to feel where the other guy's thing. You use the edge of the shield to move things around. The thing is, though, is that they're grapples, because a grapple is just manipulating your opponent, but all you have to do to get out of them is back the heck up.
Right.
And so they're non-persistent grapples, and I've written that into the game. We actually had a play test where they came up, and sometimes they were useful and sometimes they weren't, because if you were just fighting with someone on a wide open field and they can just back up, then your binds don't work too well. But they do force your foe to back up. And playing for distance is pretty cool. It's less cool on a white featureless hex map or square map. It's way cool if there's a cliff behind them. Right? And you get into a case where that bind is really important because you're saying, well, I can grapple you and I can manipulate your shield and unready your weapon, or I can push you off the cliff. And either works for me.
Our group, we went, because where I study, train, whatever you want to call it, the guy who was kind of like one of the lead instructors, again, very loose terminology, he lived in Germany for a time. He knows German almost as well as he knows English. So like he would typically call it, it's Winden and Binding, winding and binding. And like we would have drills of like, okay, get to the line, put out your blade, and you would just try and manipulate the other without moving your feet. And then we would step it up and be like, okay, stay inside the circle and keep the blades, moving. And how can you maneuver your opponent around with just the contact on the blade? And I always thought those things were a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's a good drill.
So, is your weapon binding, is that in the grappling rules for 5e? Or was that something you specifically did for GURPS?
That's something that I did. The persistent versus non-persistent was needed for the Powered by GURPS product. You can abstract it in 5e better because there's no active defense rolls, right? You can say, oh, I'm grappling with my shield. Oh, well, I'm going to just take a step back. Okay, the control points are gone, right? So that kind of thing. So I'm a big Rule Zero guy, and I'm a big, okay, what's going on at the table? What would make sense? Grab the rules you need, throw the ones away you don't, on a moment-by-moment basis. So in this particular case, if you're grappling with a shield and someone says, oh, I'm just going to back up, I would either allow the attacker to follow if they had movement points left over, or just say, okay, yeah, you can back up. And, of course, doing that without disengaging provokes an attack of opportunity, so that's okay.
Right.
That's not a thing in Powered by GURPS, and so there needs to be a little bit more for that. Whoops. Can you hear me?
All right. Yeah, we can hear you. Your sound kind of changed a little bit. While you're fixing that, shout out to Fantasy Grounds College. Thank you so much for the super chat.
Thank you. Yeah, I like that idea for the grappling, but you can basically, rather than roll a strength to get out of it or whatever, escape, you can just simply walk backwards.
But I mean, with the way winding and binding works, based on my limited experience, it totally makes sense that like, okay, I'm grappling you, which means I'm applying pressure to your blade, and if you just essentially step back without taking the actual carefulness of I'm going to use my action and disengage, I could see how that could warrant an attack of opportunity, which would totally work.
Yeah. Can you hear me again?
Yes.
Okay, good. Sorry. For some reason I bumped something and all of a sudden my mic cut out. I apologize for that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, one of the things that you want to do is I think that you want to do is you want to have interesting combats, right? You want it to be fun. I do hit points, you do hit points, I do hit points, you do hit points. That is boring in any game system, right? That is universally just simply a war of attrition that makes the combat less interesting. It's not uninteresting, but it's less interesting. And so the control points and the grappling and the key about the rule set, the control points rule set, is if I get Socratic on this, I say, well, how does one make an attack in most games? Well, you roll to hit against some kind of target number, and if you're successful, whether or not you have a defensive roll, you have an effect roll. And in a melee, in 5th edition, because it's the quickest and easiest, attack roll against an armor class. If you win, you do damage. Well, grappling, especially in certain other editions, grappling has a tendency to invoke an entirely different rule set. And the concept of control points in Dungeon Grappling and Fantastic Dungeon Grappling is, please don't do that. You don't do that. You don't need to do that. If you can abstract all the technical difficulties and the techniques and the finesse and all the maneuvering that you do into roll 1d20 plus a hit bonus against an armor class, you absolutely can do that for grappling. So that's what I've done in a lot of these systems, is whatever the basic mechanic is, use that. So you don't have to get freaky with crazy rules and let's bring out the flow chart and throw the table over because it's complicated. You want it to go quickly. And most importantly, if you've ever seen the manuals and how people would fight, grappling and fighting or grappling and armed combat are not two different things. they're not two different things. They're part of the same thing. And so what you want to do is really get into a point where you can say, oh, I'm grappling the guy, and now I cut him, and now I'm grappling again, and you're doing all that with the sword and shield. And if it's abstract, like in 5th edition, you just narrate it. Oh, well, now I'm going to use my sword to attack for control points, and then I'm going to do a draw cut, and that's just converting control points to damage, to hit points, right?
Right.
And so you can do all of that stuff, and you just sort of narrate through it. But the most important thing is to keep the currency, attack roll, bonus, damage roll, equivalent, so that you're just keeping track of the same kind of mechanic. And by doing that, you can add really cool stuff to a game without forcing your players to say, and I need a giant book, but here we go. Here's the proof copy of my manuscript, right? Here's the new grappling rules. Deal with it, right? I mean, that sucks, right? That sucks for everybody. So what you want to do at best is say, oh well, here's the new grappling rules. This is Lost Hall, but I've got Dungeon Grappling kicking around here somewhere. But here's the new grappling rules, and really I can do this on 2 pages. And most of that are worked examples of how the mechanics that you've grown to know and love apply. And when you're doing that, then you're engaging the system with what it was designed to do, and that's what I've tried to do anyway.
So I like trying to use the knowledge that I have to spice up combats. I know when I learned half sorting, that was like, all right, this to me who have watched loads of movie and TV sword fights over the years, to me this sounds pretty ridiculous. Why would someone ever do this? And then
you try it,
and then you try it and you realize, wow, this is really spectacular, and it's used against specific types of armor.
You're frozen on me.
Nah, I mean, looks like things are still going.
No, not on my end. You had a little skipping.
Oh, okay. I don't know.
You're back to normal.
But half sorting was used against particular types of styles and armors because it's like, all right, there's no point in me swinging this massive sword.
Oh, we lost him.
Oh, jeez.
I think he said something about something's closing. Man, my voice is done.
I'm back. Are you back?
You are back. We never left.
All right, I'm back.
Good.
So, I'm sorry, I completely missed everything that... and now Ted is frozen again. Damn it.
Oh, see, you're frozen on our end.
Okay, well, at least you can hear me.
Okay, so if you go down to the bottom corner, if you hit stop video, that should turn you into a black box, and it'll if you're having bandwidth issues, that'll turn that off, but we'll still see you.
Also, another technical thing is don't minimize zoom, because it will totally freeze you. So you have to have zoom up and running normally.
So we won't get to see your happy face,
or that sweet shield.
But
yeah, well, I turned off all of the my internet stuff in the background, so let's try that. I should have a good connection. I mean, it's a
Zoom is not heavy.
Zoom is not heavy, and it's a fast cable. It's a fast download. So I won't be able to see the questions as they happen, but I'm sure that you will relay them to me.
Absolutely. So like I said, half sorting is meant for specific armor types and whatnot, because there's no point in using this big old sword if they're sheathed in plate mail. You got to get into those weak spots.
Right, and even mail, even chain mail. We frequently will do a demo at school where Arthur will take a sharp sword and I've got my mail shirt and I'll let him hit the hell out of me. Right? And it's funny because he's hitting on me and it's not padded. It's just it's just mail over my tunic. And then at the end he'll go and make the stab and it's like, oh no, don't do that. And that of course proves the point. Right, with the point is that you got to use the right tool for the right job. Use a can opener to get somebody out of plate armor, plate harness, and you thrust against
someone in chain
mail. And mail was one of the armors of choice for like 1,000 years. It wasn't perfect because the metallurgy wasn't perfect, but it was pretty good.
So there's a handful of questions that have come and gone, and I'll scroll back and grab them. So are there any particular awesome weapons or items in this particular setting?
Let's see. No, not really. And I guess what I would say there is it's designed as well. Let me try that again. There's nothing unique yet. Now I want to put some stuff in there. I haven't introduced some treasure, but it makes use of the standard enchantments and items that are part of the Dungeon Fantasy role-playing game box set. Make no mistake, this is not me saying I don't like what Steve Jackson Games did with the DFRPG. I'm going to do it my way. This is support for a great product that could use some extra help in getting people into it. The I Smell a Rat adventure that came with it is pretty cool. But it's and there's a couple other dungeons coming up. There's what is it? I Smell a Rat. There's a sequel that I'm blanking on the name. But and then there's a couple that have appeared in Dungeon Fantasy Adventures for Pyramid Magazine. But there's not anything like what I'm doing yet. And the exciting thing about this particular thing is it's the first ever license for, I'd call a core GURPS product or GURPS-ish product like this that has gone to a third party. And to me, of course, because I'm a fan of the company and the system, and also as a publisher, this is very exciting because it opens up the doorway to high quality fan produced content, as long as you've got a track record for delighting the audience, keeping your promises, and the editorial chops to write well and meet Steve Jackson Games' relatively high editorial standards. So if this goes well financially, then the money guys will be happy, and if it's a well-produced, well-edited, well-written, good playable module, then the design people will be happy, and maybe I get to do another one.
That is awesome. Mark wants to know how, if any, does the armor affect grappling in your system? Weight, strength, and an armored soldier in a grapple would destroy an unarmored guy. Everything on him could be considered a weapon. Yeah,
pretty much. I think that's fair. Armor in GURPS at least, armor contributes encumbrance. You're penalized to dex if you your dexterity if you are wearing armor that is heavier than certain multiples of your basic lift. You're going to have the thing about armor in a lot of ways though is like if I'm wearing mail and you put me in an arm bar, I'm still going to get my arm broken. In order to be effective fighting armor, it has to allow full range of motion for the motions you're doing. So it's less protective against a grapple than in some cases, but obviously if I grapple you and take a dagger and go like this on 3-4 millimeter plate armor, I'm going to be going. I'm making a nice bell-like ringing sound, but that's all that I'm effectively doing. So yeah, it's there's no question. Armor if you can get it, especially armor if you can get it when you're fighting things that want to bite you.
So jumping in the way back, early on, someone was asking, how would you do a Captain America, shield build with, throwing and fighting with it? I think we did a video on this or talked about it before. To me, you could kind of just treat the shield as a weapon and use Battlemaster could get some tricks. Or I think you could develop it as its own like monk style of fighting with a shield. How do you?
I think that's cool, especially since, like Spider-Man said, I don't think that shield obeys the laws of physics. So I think it would be worth a feat in 5th edition. In GURPS, you would probably do it with like a throwing master or weapon master shield advantage, where you could throw it and have it bounce off of things and have it return to you. Interestingly enough, in the Icelandic sagas, there are attestations of people throwing shields as a weapon. So the combat frisbee is not entirely bogus.
I was just thinking of combat frisbee.
Yeah. So I wouldn't want to get hit with 5 to 6 pounds, because that's all. This thing's 5 3/4 pounds, right? They're really light.
It's all it's all in one plane. So
yeah, it's really it's really, that's all there is to it.
Yeah.
And this is. And the thing is that if you look closely, right, this is the hide and the stitching to keep the grain together. Yeah, it's very light and nimble, and when you think about it, it has to be, right? You're fighting, and you're trying to kill somebody. The other thing is that it doesn't play well in games and in combat sports. But if you think about the battles of the time, you'd have, they fought for 8 hours and 5 or 10% of the people were casualties. So you can't have your classic D&D, or frankly, GURPS is even worse for this because of the 1 second action economy. You can't have something where it's like, fight, die, right? The thing in the movies where you've got Mel Gibson and the main cast and a field littered with bodies. Everybody's dead but Mel. And I'm talking about Braveheart, obviously. Everybody's dead but Mel. That's not how these battles worked. There was a reason why the Roman legions considered decimation, killing 1 in 10, to be a horrible thing to do to a unit, a military unit, or an opposing force. It ruined unit cohesion. And that's still true. 10% is a horrendous casualty rate. Considered a horrendous casualty rate. And more than that is considered a crushing victory, and it usually didn't happen. And I think part of that has to do with it. Weapons are sharp and pointy and nasty. You don't want to die and get cut. And if you get killed, you're the loot. And the point is to get the other guy's loot. So the extent to which that battles are as fully engaged as they're usually depicted in a lot of this stuff, it makes me wonder. I'm not an archaeologist. I haven't studied it, but given the way that you see it in film, which is almost always wrong and done for excitement, and given the way that you read the histories of the things, I would be curious. I wouldn't want to have. I mean, this comes back around to the throwing shields and stuff. It'd be interesting to see what that really looked like, and what a battle really looked like, and if it was really as everybody's engaged everywhere on the line as you see. It's hard to say. On the one hand, they fought and they were fighting for real, and anything that you could do that didn't stain your honor, or that you killed the other guy and so you couldn't hear how it stained your honor, was probably done in a fight. But I don't know. I'm a little far afield. Maybe I need less coffee or more.
So Brian says, was there any cooperative shield strategies? Looking to flavor up my descriptions for taking the help action in combat encounters.
So I think that's a great idea. Actually, I like the help action. One of the things that's interesting about that is that the protection fighting style in 5th edition says, you can use your shield or whatever to cover for a friend and stuff like that. Some of the stuff that is enabled by these fighting styles and feats seemed more to me to be, if you have a shield, you can do that.
Yeah, I would agree.
Right. And so in terms of what I did was I said in Dragon Heresy, in the appendix, which is my, hey, here's some optional rules for extra complexity. What I said you could do is you can form up. If you have 2 people with shields or the protection fighting style, you can form up, and you're only flanked if you're seriously outnumbered. So if you have like 3 people with shields and they declare, we're going to help each other by forming a shield wall or forming a barrier, just because you've got 2 people adjacent to you, which is usually the trick for getting advantage, now you need 4 to overwhelm your 3. You need someone who can sort of get around that line. And so that's kind of how I handled that in the abstract. The other way to do it is, if you're mapping it out, you say, if you want advantage because you're flanking somebody, you had better damn well flank them. You've got to get around that line, engaging all the attacks of opportunity and the nasty multiple strikes that you have, and actually strike from behind. So part of that is in a theater of the mind style. You need reasons to deny things to bad guys by taking this action that otherwise they would be able to do. And I like the you can't flank someone if you're in a shield wall.
Right.
And if you're doing miniatures and maps, saying no, if you want to flank someone, you actually have to flank them. But that means that you can flank. So if you can come up behind somebody and they're not facing you, it means you have to track facing. Then you can sneak up behind somebody and shank them. And even though it's just one, yeah, that counts as a surprise attack, and they don't get to defend, and they're blah blah blah. And so you get to knife them. In Dragon Heresy, because I have separate wounds and vigor, those surprise attacks, you can't use the reaction to turn a good hit into a frantic defense. So you can literally go up to 20th level barbarian, and with a critical hit with a proper weapon, you can cause a mortal wound in one attack. You don't have to whittle through 275 hit points to get there. You come up, you have access to his neck, you stick him there, and he just drops. So there's
because of the
bit
split,
more grit in that one.
Split in how the wounds work and things.
That's right. And frankly, that's how GURPS works, right? What most editions of D&D do with hit points, GURPS does with active defenses. You actually parry a potentially successful blow, and if anything gets through, first it goes off of armor, and then it gets to the creamy knightly center inside. And wounds are bad, right? They're actually really debilitating, and they stack up quickly, and the you know, in a way, GURPS is sort of, I'm sure, in a way, GURPS is a lot like soccer or football if you're in Europe. You get a lot of action back and forth before somebody scores a goal.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And that's very much like, well, sort of how real life works. But, you know, D&D abstracts that with hit points, and you see the hit point bars ratcheting down until you've got somebody, and then that last blow kills them. That's very Gygaxian. That's page 82 of the old DM guide, right? Of course, a person can't be pincushion with arrows or swords. They're just people, but hit points represent more than that.
Yes. It's combat stamina. It's all that stuff.
Right, it's all the stuff. But
nobody,
you know, the later editions sort of got away from that level of abstraction and trying to represent blow by blow, and in getting more detailed and trying to give a little bit more high resolution narrative. Some of the abstractions, I think, start to give way in certain places.
It's in my games, until someone is actually getting close to death, they're not actually hit. Sometimes when they're hit, like it's the start of combat, if they're hit, they might not even been hit. They just had to dodge out of the way, or they blocked it with their shield, and it hurt their, and it's like jarring their arm.
Right, and one of the things though that gets that in trouble is in ranged weapon and modern games. So if you're going to do the old 3.0 or 3.5 D&D modern, and you're unloading on someone with a 50 cal, right? I mean, it's I call it the hit point problem, because you're taking 2d12 per bullet, and it's a 50 cal. And so you can either say, well, that's not really, you're either not really shooting, or you're not really hitting, or you're just getting tired, or whatever. But that starts to bump up against narrative problems pretty fast. And why would a miss from a 22 be more or less hit points of damage than a big miss? It still missed you. Oh, it's scarier. Well, I don't know. I think getting shot at is pretty scary. But so there's things like that it's a good way to resolve it. But on the other hand, every now and then you run into stuff. And if you've got a good game master and a good group of friends, and you're not doing aggressive stuff with each other, you explain it however you want, and that's the way that it probably should play. But every now and then a little bit more concrete is good, and especially if you're doing Dungeon Fantasy role-playing game where it is quite concrete. It was developed out of some dissatisfaction for some of the assumptions that were made at the time. That was the fantasy trip, I guess, and then GURPS. You know, that evolution is much more high resolution, and so some of that stuff becomes concrete, whereas otherwise it was abstract.
So, you know, going with the whole thought pattern of, you know, hit points really only being the 10% of your actual wounds. Cardboard Fortress, you know, makes a comment. So I didn't get hit, but I did get poisoned, right? So how does that work?
Exactly. So having it be a little concrete.
It's splattered in your eyes off of your block.
Right. I mean, and you can hand wave it, and you can do all kinds of stuff, and it can work. But the best games, and it doesn't matter what the system is. the best games are when the rules jive with the action in a way that you're not really thinking about the rules, right? You know, where it's I have an old, my wife is going to kill me. I have an old photograph of my wife from like 20 years ago, where she is apparently topless, but she has a role playing book covering her chest. And it was sort of a meme before a meme, where things were, don't let the rules get in the way of the game. Right. But that's, I think that's it was funny at the time, and I think it's still funny. But she doesn't watch these sort of things, so I can get away with telling that story. But the point is that ideally you're never going along saying, oh, and then I've hit, but you're not really hit, but you're poisoned, and what? And then you've devolved into blah 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 blah, right? Now you're stopping the game for an argument over that sort of thing. And while not everything needs to be written down, hard coded in the rules, because that way lies madness, a little help is helpful. And that's in a way what Dragon Heresy did. Is it there's a lot of good design concepts and concreteness that I've experienced in GURPS and other games. And 5th edition is a fantastic, robust, very modular engine. So I took the bits that I really liked, hung them on the 5th edition SRD, and came up with something that I think plays more like an old school game where life is fragile and precious, but you can still do some pretty epic stuff, and it's still fast. And honestly, the Dungeon Fantasy role-playing game took that the other direction. We're going to strip away everything from a very large, robust rule set, because I don't need to do science fiction in space for Dungeon Fantasy stuff. Although if you go back to the old pulp stuff, there was really no difference, right? Sword and sorcery and sword, it was all the same, right? It was all just cool.
A lot of the early monsters in D&D came from space.
Absolutely. And then there's Expedition to the Barrier Peaks, right? So lasers in space, lasers and spaceships and swords and sorcery, and it all works. Anyway, the point is that you take the stuff that you get to the Dungeon Fantasy role-playing game, you take everything that isn't the core of the game you want to play and throw it away, and you condense that into something that plays fast, and it's a good concept, and fundamentally, a lot of the editions of D&D are exactly that. It invented the genre. It really was core to the role-playing genre, obviously, and it's the trope namer, so to speak. And it's done that really well for a long time, or it's done that well enough that it's 80-90% market share if you look at all the different flavors. And it is what it is, and it does it pretty well. And so that kind of focus has a very beneficial outcome on game design, because you know what you're doing. And the Dungeon Fantasy role-playing game does that with a different flavor. And the games that I've played in it and continue to play in it are just a ton of fun. So, I'm thrilled to be writing for it. And I, thus far, since, all licensing revenue to Steve Jackson Games is really with no work to them, their return on investment is infinite, which is a great place to be for a company. And, I hope people like what I'm doing with it. I'm expanding the town a great deal. I think the book, this is, where is it? This is Lost Hall of Tyr. 64 pages, full color, perfect bound. It will probably double in size. Maybe 112, anywhere between 96 and 112 pages. There's an extra 20 pages of town. There's like 12 pre-gens. I'm going to need more monsters, a lot of random encounter tables, and a great deal more on the journey, and like 3 bonus mini dungeons to play through. So it's going to be a lot more. If you know the Midderlands, Glenn Seal is doing the maps. I'm ridiculously happy about that. He does great work. And so I think people are going to like it. And it's certainly the other thing that I'm going to wind up doing is I will take the expanded version and reconvert it back to Dragon Heresy. And it, you take a tiny step and you get from Dragon Heresy to 5th edition. So, not saying don't go buy Lost Hall of Tyr, but Lost Hall of Tyr is about to get a lot better.
So, going back to the Kickstarter, we got a little over 10 minutes left. what made you decide to do Vikings? I mean, obviously you've got a little bit of you know, love going on there. So,
but it's a recent love. What made it decide was I had what I thought was a cool mechanical drift on 5th edition, shields and wounds and vigor and stuff like that. And I gathered some friends to play test it and see if my idea, because right when I came up with the rules thing, right after that the DM's Guild came out, and right after that the SRD came out within a couple of weeks, really. But I wasn't expecting the SRD. The DM's Guild come and said, "Oh, I can take this idea, and instead of making a blog post, maybe I can publish it." So I started to play test, and someone's like, "Oh, I want to be a cleric. What gods do I worship?" I'm like, "I don't know. I just watched Thor, so let's do Norse mythology." And so I just made some stuff up, and it was Odin and Thor and whatever. And then the OGL and the SRD for 5th edition came out, and I was like, well, first of all, what the playtesting showed was if you're going to do this, you really need to ripple the changes through the entire book so you don't have to convert things on the fly. And that required an SRD. And oh, look, here it was. And as I was starting to blow out the rules, I said, you know, this is pretty cool, and here's some things to do. And then I started reading more about Viking mythology. And I realized two things. One is that the Viking mythology is ridiculously deep. It's got elves, it's got dragons, it's got lots of undead, it's got a lot of cool things. The other thing is that if you're looking for a culture that at least in the good stories, and there's a lot of truth to it, is really built around going out and killing things and taking their stuff.
It's like D&D in real life.
It's D&D. It is. It's one of the most D&D party cultures that you can run into, and especially it's one of the most D&D like cultures that are popular and inspire you to go read the sagas and tell good stories and all that stuff. So it really worked well, and that's really where it came from. And then as I started to do the research into the martial artsy stuff and how to use shields and how to fight with sword, you know, I had done some Korean martial arts for like 10 years, a lot of joint locks, a lot of two-handed sword, stuff like that. But I never fought sword and shield. I'd never done one-handed. And as I was learning it, I was like, wow, this is really cool. And to mix that with the Viking expeditionary culture and sort of the looting and the pillaging and the attitude that is, you know, everyone's going to die, so at least die gloriously. All of that was awesome. And so I just decided to go full throttle, and we're gonna do it, and we're gonna do that. And the more that I learned about Vikings, the more that I realized that a couple of the things that I wanted to do in the setting just slotted into it like it was not meant for it. So that's really where it came from, and it was started with game design, then got into, all right, let's reality check some of this a little bit. Then I got into the culture and the lore and the mythology, and it all kind of snowballed, and all of a sudden there's Dragon Heresy. Yeah. Oh, look, proof. Sorry, I literally just got these from the printer. Ooh.
Nice.
I see that. Nice. Look at that. Spot UV spot finish, full color. All right, sorry. This is my first time I've done a 1,500 copy print run, so I'm excited and terrified at the same time. But
Very
every little baby, it's like having your toddler, you know, it's having your baby grow up, right? If you've had kids, oh look, he farted for the first time. Ooh, right? Getting your proof and getting the stuff is just part of the process. But every little bit is exciting. I'm sure by my second or third book, or fourth or fifth or 10th book, it'll all be old hat. But I'm not getting tired of this anytime soon.
All right, so your Kickstarter has got an estimated delivery of August.
Correct.
And you feel pretty confident that you're going to be able to get the print books out by then? Or is that for PDF delivery?
PDF August. I have been a month or more early on my first 3 Kickstarters. I don't think I'm going to be early. I think I'm going to be on time.
Okay.
I think I'm going to be on time. My goal is to get the PDFs to backers the day the funds settle. That's always my goal, and that's probably the 28th or 29th of July. I feel pretty good about that. If I get my stuff together over the next week or so, the layout template is done. The art is in hand. I already know what's going on there. The maps are being drawn, and Glenn is very fast. So I have no doubt that the usual things that push a project out will be completed well in advance of due date. The writing is going well. Town is done. I have a good template for the different mini dungeons that I want to do. The hard part is actually restraining myself to stop doing cool stuff and just get things done. But I have a good team of playtesters and people to tell me, just stop. So, on the other hand, they encourage me to do things like, oh, shouldn't we talk about the daily life? I'm like, does the daily life in town involve killing things and taking their stuff? No, then no. Because this is an adventure game, right? It's good backdrop, and we've got a lot of culture. I wrote 20 or so festivals sprinkled through the year, so anytime you walk into town, there's going to be something going on
Nice.
to introduce, and these medieval festivals were awesome parties, right? And there was wrestling and target shooting and ale quaffing and ritual exchanges of insults and stone throwing and boat rowing and maiden kissing and not maiden kissing.
Caber tosses?
What?
Is there any caber tossing?
Well, that's Scottish, but sure, right? I mean, there's always going to be feats of strength and all kinds of stuff where the player characters can introduce themselves and find something cool to do. It's a great opportunity for a game master to try out new rules. Oh, we're going to do the grappling rules. How? You're going to wrestle Olaf. Right? It's low stress. If you lose, you get teased for losing. If you win, you get notoriety, and people buy you drinks, which is always good. And I did that for the playtest of another work in progress that was a Dragon Heresy thing. It was on Twitch. But you come into town and there's a festival going on is a brilliant narrative device for introducing, you voyaged for a while and you come into town and there's a festival. And it's not even wrong, because there were 60 holy days in medieval Europe, roughly 20 of which were big frickin' deals. So literally once a week, there was something going on worth getting drunk or fighting over. So it's a great way to kind of introduce people to the new culture. And in any kind of agrarian society, I think you're going to do that because you work really, really hard and you need to blow off some steam, and that's what these festivals are about.
So
you need it your downtime.
You have a handful of awesome stuff set up for the higher tiers, and for you guys out there who are looking at the Kickstarter and haven't had a chance to really dive in, there's still plenty of room for these. So is that a Thane of your own? Is that how?
A Thane of your own, yes, kind of a league of your own, but with a Thane. Yeah. So I'm going to have 8 pre-gen characters that are kind of bog standard, boring, very playable, very optimized, so that you can grab one of these guys. Rename her to Paxenarian Dorthan's daughter, if you want, and go play the holy warrior of the god of the law god or the of Thor or whatever. So you'll have some good choices. But up to 12 pre-gen characters, as long as they're reasonable and approachable from a beginner. Right. I was talking to someone who's in that tier. He wanted to make a halfling martial artist, and he's like, "This is going to be a hard character for a beginner to play." And so he's self-selected that out. But yeah, pre-gen character, write it yourself. We'll go over it with a team of experts who are going to help with that. Make sure that it's rules legal for the Dungeon Fantasy role-playing game, because there's a ton of stuff in GURPS that was not brought into the DFRPG as part of the whittling and process. So you can do that, and it'll appear in the book. And then there's the game. I'm going to Gamehole Con. I'm not a big con goer, but I'm trying to get into it, and I'll run a table of 8, and 6 spots are reserved for Kickstarter backers. And if they fill up, there's an off chance that there can be a second table, but that's really about the organizers. So that's that. I'm not doing shields this time. Last Dragon Heresy, you could buy a shield. for 500 bucks, you could get handcrafted shields to your specs, and they were to your specs. Actually, it was, I've made 31-inch shields for shorter people and 35.5-inch shields for taller people. I'm about to make the biggest shield I've ever done, 38 inches for a guy who's 6'4". And but so that I'm not doing that this time just because the timeline was tight, and I want to focus on what this is. This is a Kickstarter supporting the Dungeon Fantasy role-playing game. All the effort is going towards that. Initially, I didn't even have the real stretch goals. It was either book in PDF or PDF. And then I added a couple too because, there's some questions. Hey, can we do this? That's a great idea. Hey, what about this? Well, I'm going here anyway. Let's see if I can do it. Yes, I can. Okay, here it is. And there might be a little bit more coming. I need to talk to some people, but I've been approached by a few high energy fans about computer support and stuff. And so, who knows? I hope this grows. And certainly it's exceeded my expectations. My mental math was $20 a pledge, half book, half PDF, and about the same number of people I usually attract to a Kickstarter, 250 to 300. So I was thinking $5,000-$6,000 was the upper end for the entire campaign. We're closing in on 10 grand, and frankly, given the rate that we're at, we're going to hit that this weekend.
Right.
We're not halfway done the campaign until next Tuesday.
Oh, that is pretty spectacular, sir.
Right now, we're looking at a really nice response. And so to the point about when are the books, if responses continues, if we get 600 backers, or really 700 backers or so, then we're into the realm of like 400 to 450 print copies. Well, that's win-win because I can go full offset print at 1,000 copies of sewn binding, great paper, and the other things that you get with a true long large scale offset print run. That costs less by a lot than POD, but you have to order 500 of them. Actually, you have to order 1,000, but the money is less to write the check than if you were ordering something like 400 or 500 POD books. It's just that much less. And so there's some intermediate cases there, but that's really the only thing that would push out the late August, early September print on demand date would be, I go back to the backers and say, we've done so well that I want to give you a better book, but it's 12 to 14 weeks to get it because that's how long an offset print run takes, assuming everything goes right. But I want that. I think the backers want that. Everyone wants a better book. Everyone wants a book that's robust and feels good to play with. The Dungeon Fantasy role-playing game, not that one. On my desk. Here we go. But the DFRPG, here it is. The Exploits book is a great example of that. This is a soft cover, but if you look carefully, it is a sewn soft cover. These pages are not going to fall out. They are sewn in together. And that's a great example of what you can do when you're printing 5,000 of them. You can get a book that is soft cover or hardcover that is very, very robust. And I'd love to give that to the backers. But I am small time, relatively speaking. I hope to not always be. And so I have to be a little bit careful with the money that I lay out.
All right, so we're just about at the hour mark. Any last pitch or message that you want to send out there, Doug?
The biggest thing that I could say is first, thank you. The people who have already pitched in have done a wonderful thing. And also thank you for having me back on again. The other is I would really encourage people to look at this as two things. One is I think that it's going to be a great product and something that will be fun to play. Two is it sends a message to Steve Jackson Games and a message that they've indicated by giving me the license that they are already receptive to, that maybe we should do this again. Maybe you could do this again. It needs to be good. It needs to be well written. It needs to be high quality. It needs to meet the standards and obey the rules. But people have been egging on for third-party support for Steve Jackson Games products for a while. Support this. Show that it's going to work. And who knows what can happen. And I know that there's a lot of third-party people out there who would love to help write for the system and have the skills to do it, but the perception is it's been closed, and it looks like the door is cracking. And the best way that we can do this, and it's a great thing and so don't just wait. And the reason I say support the Kickstarter is it front loads the licensing revenue to Steve Jackson Games. Every pledge doesn't come to me. I pay the licensing fee as part of my contract to them. So what it does is, let's say that it was going to sell 1,000 copies over a couple of years. This puts that 1,000 copies into a month.
Right.
Right. And so it's a really good thing for everybody to say, this is the demand and we're willing to put our money where our mouth is. I'm doing it with my time and effort. And there are already there are over 300 people who are doing it with their money. So that's really what I would say is especially for your GURPS fans out there. And one of the things that I'm realizing, one last thing, is it's GURPS has higher resolution than 5th edition, and so it is more difficult to develop for GURPS. But it is very easy to take material developed for Dungeon Fantasy role-playing game and put it into 5th edition. And I intend to do that. If I get more licensing, I will co-develop the Dragon Heresy, which is really getting from there. It's a tiny step. But I will co-develop the Powered by GURPS and Dragon Heresy in the Eterra or Nordland, as I call it, because I'm de-Norsing it a little bit for the well, because you want it to be generic, right? If it's my world, my this, my that, it's hard to slap that into your own campaign.
Yeah.
File the edges off a little bit, and it's modular. And so that's what we're going with. All right, that's my pitch.
All right. So thank you for coming and hanging out with us today. Thank you guys all in the chat for chiming in and asking your questions. So you know the drill. Till next time, stay nerdy.